You've spelunked into the Matt Cave. Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week, well, Utah State has a new era. I'm going to go over what you Aggies are just getting into. First, I'm just going to say I'm sorry. Second, a little update about the show. I know what I said last week, and I want to clear up any confusion about why I'm not talking about certain things this week. And then lastly, I am going to go over the trading block for the Utah Jazz as we inch ever closer to the trading deadline, which is in February. So we're just over a month, maybe 2 months, to where some moves will be made. I know the Jazz will be active, so I'll go over what I expect from them. As always, thank you all for being here. If you could do me a favor, hit that like button, 5-star review, like, comment, whatever it is, wherever you listen. Greatly appreciate it. Helps me out a ton. Gets more spelunkers in here. And what's more fun than having a lot of spelunkers? I don't know, personally. So I would appreciate if you did that on the socials. I'm no longer on X or Twitter or whatever it's called. And I am on Facebook, The Matt Cave Podcast. I'm also on YouTube, The Matt Cave Podcast, all one word. And then I am also on twitch.tv/Matt's Cave. I have not been active the past couple of weeks. That will change, if not now, by the new year. All right, let's dive into things. And let's start with Utah State hiring their new head coach. And it's a very familiar face. It's Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco Mendenhall took a hiatus from coaching after he, I want to say retired, but left his position at Virginia and moved over to New Mexico for one season. And then Utah State came calling, and he answered the phone. I'll just break down his history, and then I'll give you my opinion. Because as you know, my opinions are unfiltered. All right. So Bronco Mendenhall his first head coaching gig was with BYU from 2005 to 2015. Then in 2015, at the end of that season, he was hired on as the University of Virginia's head coach from 2016 to 2021. And then, obviously, like I said, for one season at New Mexico this previous season in 2024. Overall record sits at 140 wins and 88 losses over his 3 stops. His overall record in bowl games is at 500. He's 7-7. His overall record in championship games is 0-1, with the only one being at Virginia because the Mountain West didn't have a championship game back in its original version. So that was with Virginia. That's 0-1. And then his record in rivalry games. Key rivals, obviously, being the University of Utah when he was at BYU. Key rivalry when he was at Virginia was with Virginia Tech, and his rival at New Mexico was New Mexico State. So that record, 5 wins, 12 losses. Yeah, let's get into the stops here. So at BYU, from 2005 to 2015, Bronco was 99 wins and 43 losses overall. In bowl games, he was 6-5. And then his record against Utah, well, Utah fans know it well. BYU fans know it even more. 3 wins, 7 losses, including 5 straight losses. With the worst loss of the millennium coming in 2011. Yeah, remember that game, Cougar fans? I do. Oh, boy. 54-10, and that was in Provo. That wasn't even in Rice-Eccles. That was in Provo. Snaps flying over the head of the quarterbacks. Receivers dropping balls right into the hands of the University of Utah players. BYU players just not wanting to tackle. Wow, it was a great game. Let me tell you what. He did leave BYU as the second most winning coach in history behind, obviously, the great Lavelle Edwards. And so he left with 99 wins there. I will always remember him as the holier-than-thou, I'm smarter than you, how dare you question me, ultimate authority guy. That's how I remember Bronco Mendenhall. Very unfriendly to the press and media. Just a very awkward human being, in my opinion. Terrible interview. And just, I don't know. And the stoic face wanting to be Lavelle Edwards, none of it worked. Obviously. I mean, his record is really good. 99 wins, 43 losses. But that record against Utah, it's terrible. 3 wins and 7 losses. And the last win for Bronco against Utah was like 2009. After that, it was 5 straight losses. It's terrible. And in most of those losses, it wasn't even close. So that's what I remember as growing up as a BYU fan and a recovering BYU fan. That's what I remember Bronco Mendenhall and his tenure at BYU. Lofty expectations, and he never lived up to them. And in the big games against the University of Utah and against TCU, he always came up short. He was outcoached every time. And when he left, I shed no tears. I thought, good luck at Virginia. That's a tough place to coach. As tough as BYU is, Virginia is just as tough, just for different reasons. And let's talk about that tenure at Virginia. So Virginia, when he took over that program, were perennial bottom feeders of the ACC. They were the cupcake. Everybody was excited to play Virginia because they knew it was a win. It's like my senior year at Olympus, everybody had our football team for their homecoming game. That was Virginia. So his overall record at Virginia was 36 wins and 38 losses. He was 1-2 in bowl games, and then obviously in that championship game, he lost to the runner-up that season in 2019 to Clemson, 63-17. Now, to be fair, Clemson was a very, very good team. The only loss they had that entire season was to an LSU team that had half of their players in the NFL in prominent positions, like actual contributors, and most of that offense. So that's the only loss he had or not the only loss, but that was the loss in that season in the championship game to Clemson. That was Trevor Lawrence, that entire team. So that was that. And then in the bowl game, the Orange Bowl, which is their most prestigious bowl game that Virginia ever went to. Some might argue the Sugar Bowl in like the 70s or something, but he went into that game and then lost to Florida. Yeah. Big game, lost. Big game, right after that, lost. His overall record against arch rival Virginia Tech, 1 win, 5 losses. I think you see a theme here, right? He can't win the big game. He'll win games he's supposed to win, which is like halfway there, but then he can't get the upset wins. He has a mental block. Like, he can't get his guys up and ready and ready to fight in these big games. That's another thing that I remember is BYU in the rivalry games and the big games against TCU, they always came out flat, and they just got pushed around until like the third quarter, by which time the game was pretty much already over. So that's what I remember most. And then his tenure at New Mexico, it was 1 season, 5 wins, 7 losses, no bowl game, but he was undefeated against arch rival New Mexico State. Yeah, 1-0. So I guess kudos there against a New Mexico State team that I think won 3 total games this year. But here's some trivia for you, Spelunkers. Make yourself sound smart. The rivalry for the New Mexico State game has 2 names. It's the Rio Grande rivalry, or more colloquially known, that's easy for me to say, the Battle of I-25. So there you go. A little trivia for you. So that overall record looks okay, I guess, for all stops, 140 and 88. That's not bad. It's above 500, right? But like I said, when it comes to Bronco, it's the best hire Utah State probably could hope for, given the current circumstances surrounding the athletic department and the university as a whole. Again, I said this a couple of months ago. I'm going to say it again. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to talk about it. But there's lawsuits. There's a whole bunch of stuff circling around that university at the moment. So getting a Bronco Mendenhall, who has Power 4 coaching experience at Virginia, he coached BYU okay, I guess. And New Mexico, that one stop, you can't really glean anything from that. It's the best they can do. Aggie fans should prepare, like I said earlier, for someone that carries a holier-than-thou attitude with a smugness. He always knows better. He's and then I'm not going to say it again, but I'll say it again. He's a choker. He is. But he rarely gets upset. So if he goes in as the favorite to win the game, he probably will win the game. If he goes into an equal game or a game where they're underdogs, he's probably not going to win. He does have that marquee win against Oklahoma. When Oklahoma came into that season, everybody was expecting them to go undefeated, get to the national championship game. Sam Bradford was a returning Heisman winner, all of that stuff. But BYU upset them. That was a really cool win. But that was like it for Bronco. That was it. I don't remember any other game where BYU came in as a underdog and then outperformed expectations like that and got a win. Maybe they got a close loss, but people don't remember the losses, right? Just look at me and my recollection there. So, one last thing I want to bring up. New Mexico finished with the same conference record as Utah State, 3-4 in the Mountain West. But New Mexico finished 5-7, where Utah State finished 4-8. With Bronco Mendenhall, the first season is not going to go well. His first season at BYU, they went 6-6 and lost in the bowl game. And then his first year at Virginia, they went 2-10. And then his first and only year at New Mexico, like I said, 5-7. So that's not a great track record for an instant turnaround. What you can expect, though, is a well-coached team. Broncos teams are rarely penalized. They do what they need to do to get the win in most circumstances. It's rarely flashy. It's defense first. And that's pretty much what you have to expect here over the next 6 years, Aggies fans, because that's what the contract is for. Yikes. I'm sorry. We'll see what happens. You can expect probably a string of 6 to 7 to 8 win seasons, but you're always going to lose to Boise State. You're probably always going to lose to your chief rivals, Utah and BYU. That's just how he operates. Man, I'm sorry. That's all I can say, Aggie fans. I'm sorry. But let's move it on. So, show update. I did say last week that over the coming weeks, I was going to do a season review for Utah, BYU. But this week, as I was looking at it, there's a lot of moving parts before I want to give like my final review. Obviously, with BYU, they still have their bowl game. But for both of them, I want to do a better review that I could give you within like a couple of weeks. And the reason for this is the transfer portal and then what is going to be happening with the coordinator positions for both teams. I don't think BYU is going to be making a change unless their hand is forced. And what I mean by that is if Jay Hill gets hired away somewhere else. Utah State was the big scare, I guess you could say, for BYU fans, but I didn't think he was ever really going to go there. Because why would you go as a coordinator in a Power 4 school that is going to finish in the top 25? You had a very successful season. Why take a step backwards into a team and a university that is in the situation that Utah State is in? I never thought Jay Hill was going to do that. The ones I'm more worried about are positions like West Virginia, other Power 4 schools that are looking to rebound. Those are the ones that I'm more worried about with Jay Hill. But BYU fans shouldn't worry that much because of the health scare that Jay Hill had at the start of this season. That will scare away almost every suitor that will come knocking because of the unpredictability about it. Will it happen again? All of that stuff. So I think for now, for at least this offseason, the coordinator positions at BYU are pretty much going to stay static. Aaron Roderick obviously isn't going to go anywhere. I don't think any university is going to hire him away, especially with how the season ended, where the offense was just getting worse and worse and worse. So that's what's going to happen for BYU, I think. For Utah, they did just announce that they have hired their offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, from New Mexico, previously at Virginia. We'll see how that works out. Obviously, they weren't going to get a splash hire like a Chip Kelly or anything like that. But I think it's an interesting one because during the tenure of Kyle Whittingham, the coach flow happened one way. It was from Utah to BYU. Well, now it's taken a circuitous route, but now it's BYU to Utah, which is really interesting to me. We'll have to see what happens. There's already been a lot of transfers for the University of Utah, which is why I want to wait for the dust to settle. So this probably review won't happen until the new year, because the transfer portal for players to sign, like officially sign, not just like verbally commit, is from December 9th through the 28th. And so that's when I'll have a clearer picture of what's going to happen for both schools, because BYU lost some big contributors as well. I talked about them a little bit last week, and we'll see what happens as we move forward. That's why I'm holding off on doing my season review of these two programs, just because there's a lot of dust still to settle. And as you Spelunkers know, I don't like to be the first one there. I like to make sure I get my facts right, and then I'll talk to you about it. And that's what's going to happen with this. I really wanted to do a season review. I wanted to get it quick. But then I saw, oh yeah, the transfer portal's different. It is from December 9th to the 28th. And then there's new coordinators happen. There's a lot of moving parts still for the coaching staffs. Kyle Whittingham's future is still up in the air, so I'm going to have to wait. But it will happen. It'll just take longer than I initially thought. So I apologize, but you get a little preview into what next year is going to hold, and that's where we're at. All right, so let's move on to the Jazz. The trading season's coming up. The NBA trade deadline is going to come across our screens and calendars on February 6th, which happens to be a Thursday, at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. There's some more trivia for you if you want it. And trade talks are really starting to heat up a lot. There's teams that are cratering out, like the 76ers. There are teams like the Knicks who are panicking a little bit because they thought they were going to be better. There are teams like the Jazz who have useful veterans that teams would want. Instant offense in Jordan Clarkson. John Collins is reviving his career very nicely. He started the season first 2 months, the first player in Jazz history, by the way, to shoot 50, 40, 90, which is 50% from the field, 40% from three-point range, and 90% from the free throw line. Pretty good stat line. And it's not like he's a bench guy doing that 5 minutes a game. He's a starter, and he plays the majority of the game. He's going to be attractive again because it looks like he's resurrected his career, which was the goal always for the Jazz picking him up. To get him, there's a lot of talent there. He was injured for the last little bit of his career at Atlanta. Flip him, get some draft picks or some young guys or expiring contracts, and move on from there. So John Collins and Jordan Clarkson, I really don't want the Jazz, like the fan in me doesn't want the Jazz to move Jordan Clarkson. And I've said this a lot of times, and I'm going to say it again. It's very rare for the Jazz to get players that actually like the city of Salt Lake and the state of Utah, like Jordan Clarkson does. It's very rare. He's a great ambassador for the team and the league for the state of Utah. And I understand like the business side of it, but the fan in me really wants to see Jordan Clarkson finish his career here. I really do. But that's not going to happen. He's too good of a player. He's seen a lot of stuff in the NBA. He's a great locker room presence. So I just think it's too tempting for these teams to not call about Jordan Clarkson. So John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, and the third player might surprise you, but Walker Kessler could be on the move as well. That's one that is going to be a tough pill for a lot of Jazz fans to swallow. But if you look across the league, there's only one other player that's really like him, and that's Rudy Gobert. And the NBA has just moved on from this sort of defensive-minded center, great at rebounding, but can't shoot the three, doesn't really dribble all that well, and is kind of stilted in his movement. He's gotten better, he's gotten stronger, but I don't know if he fits into the system that Coach Will Hardy and GM Justin Zanuck want to create. The offense that I see when Kessler's off the floor is free-flowing, balls moving all over the place, guys are cutting. You don't get that with a guy who kind of just sits in the paint. It clogs up a lot of motion in the motion offense that Will Hardy likes to run. And so that's why I'm thinking he's on the trading block too. What is the kind of return that the Jazz can expect for these guys? Well, never rule out what Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck can do when it comes to getting a return on investment. So what I see about this, it's different than with Ochai Agbaji and with Kelly Olynyk. It's different because John Collins and Jordan Clarkson still have a couple of years on their contracts, and John Collins is still pretty young. Jordan Clarkson, not so much, but he is a great bench player. He's a 6th Man of the Year award winner. It's just, there's a lot of value there for instant offense off the bench. And so depending on the team they can get assets from, I would like to see the Jazz make a deal with a team that is on the fringe, a team trying to push into the playoff instead of the play-in. And so I think there would be a lot of value in those picks because those teams are the ones that have general managers and head coaches basically fighting for their jobs. And so they would be willing to part with future considerations, whereas a team like the Cavaliers, obviously they've already spent their future capital, but a team like the Cavaliers or a team like the Timberwolves, they're not going to do that because, well, A, they don't have that sort of stuff, but B, their superstars are still pretty young. Donovan Mitchell's still really young. Jared Allen, young. Anthony Edwards for the Timberwolves, super young. So they don't really need to make that push. And so teams that I'm looking at would be the Lakers. I know Jazz fans, I hate it too. I hate the Lakers. I get it. But that is the kind of sweet spot for the Jazz to look for teams. Maybe the 76ers want to make a change. They get rid of draft capital so that they can bring in some stuff to turn their season around. The Milwaukee Bucks trying to do something to get Giannis Antetokounmpo to stay past his current contract. Maybe not request a trade. They are at the, I'm just going to call it the salary cap to keep it simple. The NBA's financial setup is so darn complicated, it is impossible to explain it to a layman. It is impossible. You can't do it. Bobby Marks of ESPN does a fabulous job of breaking it down, but there is no way under the sun can you explain it to the average fan. There's no way to do it. But Milwaukee, the Lakers, the Warriors, they're all bumping their heads against a salary cap ceiling that is very punitive in what it does to punish those teams for being at that point. Like, there's different levels. They call them aprons. And if you get to the second one, you have to give up a whole bunch of stuff. It's crazy. The Jazz are they're not even close to the first apron. And so that's why the Jazz are a very attractive trade partner to a lot of these teams, is because they can dump bad contracts on the Jazz for younger guys or for useful veterans like John Collins or Jordan Clarkson, whose deals aren't that hard to swallow. So, teams I'm looking to make a move with the Jazz, obviously the Lakers, the Warriors probably because they had such a great start to the season and it's tailed off, and so they'll want to recapture something. And so I think the Jazz would be a good trade partner for them. And the reason I like that with the Warriors and the Lakers is their stars are towards the ends of their careers. LeBron James is 40 years old. Steph Curry just played in his first and only Olympics, and his ankles don't have very many years left. Draymond Green is a shell of his former self. He just got benched. Klay Thompson has already gone to Dallas. And so Golden State, they want to have one last hurrah, push the chips all in. Hey, Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck are just a phone call away. They got some useful pieces for you. John Collins, 50, 40, 90. You could use that, right? So that's something. The Pacers thought they were going to have a fantastic year. They've stalled out. They're barely in the play-in picture. So keep an eye on Indiana. Indiana and the Jazz have been trade partners in the past, and that could be something that could happen again because they want to maximize what they have with Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner, and so they need a couple of other pieces. The Jazz have them, and they are for sale because the Jazz want to get the best lottery odds they can to get the kid from Rutgers, Ron Harper Jr. Ron Harper Sr. said he didn't want him to go to the Jazz. He has since recanted since the backlash. And then Cooper Flagg as well. So that's the target for the Jazz, is they need to start tanking and they need to stop blowing out teams that are in their range of the lottery, like they did against Portland. Stop winning those games by 50-something points. You need to lose those games by like 5 points. Get intense NBA action for the young guys, but still lose the game. That's what needs to happen. So that's what the Jazz are going to start to do. They're going to move these pieces. And the return they get is not as important as what's going to happen to the team, because when you remove veterans, that opens up minutes for guys like Cody Williams, Kyle Filipowski, Bryce Sensabaugh, guys that need time on the court, both for their own development and for the front office and Coach Will Hardy to know what they have. You can't lock these kids behind veterans because you know what you get with the veterans. You don't know what you're getting with those other guys. Keontae George, Isaiah Collier are both locked in for the future for the Jazz. I love watching both of them. Isaiah Collier is a rookie. In the game against Portland, he got out of control a couple of times. That'll change once he gets more reps. But I want to know what Cody Williams can do. He does need to bulk up, that's true, but he's like 19. Kyle Filipowski, I want to know what he can do. And the only way for that to happen is to get rid of the veterans that are blocking their playing time. Because, God love him, Will Hardy wants to win. He's not here to tank. He's here to win. And so he's going to put the team on the floor. That gives him the best chance to do so. And so what Justin Zanuck and Danny Ainge need to do is they need to take the tools out of his hands, give him some Play-Doh, and say, go play in a corner for the rest of the season with this Play-Doh, mold it into something that looks cool and something that can attract either a free agent, a trade, or get us that lottery pick. That's what's needing to happen in Salt Lake City. And I think it's going to. I think the Jazz are finally having the start to a season that they wanted to have a couple of seasons ago and last season, where they have these veterans that look good, but the team is 5-21. Clearly out of the picture, nothing to do but trade those veterans that look good. I think we're finally there. Again, trade deadline, Thursday, February 6th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Although there are a couple of trades that can happen if the trade is submitted to the league office by 12:59 and 59 seconds. The processing time doesn't matter. It's just when the stuff gets into the league office. So you could see a trade announced at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Salt Lake. All right, so that's the show this week, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. I apologize, Aggie fans. I mean, you're going to get some wins, I guess, but it'll be interesting to see how Bronco Mendenhall evolves in the new era of college football, especially at a school like Utah State, whereas before he was at schools like Virginia and BYU that had people willing to pay. Utah State doesn't really have that. So we'll see what happens there. But thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you all next week when we spelunk back into the Matt Cave.